This is problem number 8 from section 2.5. It says air temperature decreases as altitude increases. So as your altitude gets, as you get higher in the air, your temperature is going down. That makes sense. That's why if you're in the mountains, it's colder than it is at ground level. If the ground temperature is 84 degrees Fahrenheit, then the air temperature x miles high is T equals 84 minus 19x. Meaning, I start at 84 on the ground. As I go up x miles high, I'm losing 19 degrees per mile. Okay, that equation makes sense. Determine the altitudes x where the temperature T is between 4 degrees Fahrenheit and 36 degrees Fahrenheit. So determine those altitudes. Well, if I want them to be between 4 and 36, let's go ahead and say that 4 degrees Fahrenheit is less than or equal to 84 minus 19x, which is less than or equal to 36 degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, x stands for the altitudes. Let's go ahead and subtract 84 then. Subtract 84 from each side. And we subtract 84, we get negative 80, less than or equal to negative 19x, less than or equal to 36 minus 84, negative 48. Divide by negative 19. By the way, this is part A. And we end up with 80 over 19. Flip the inequality signs. Flip the inequality sign. 48 over 19. Now, if you look at this, 80 over 19, that's going to be about 4, and we better write that in. That's 4 point. I'll actually get it perfect. Let's just round it to 4.2. Greater than or equal to x greater than or equal to 48 divided by 19, 2.5. So determine where the altitude is x, where the temperature is between 4 and 36. So you could say at altitudes between 2.5 miles and 4.2 miles, the temperature are between 4 degrees Fahrenheit and 36 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's part A. Part B, use an absolute value and equality to describe these altitudes. Well, we already have, let's see, well, okay, we want to use an absolute value inequality to describe these altitudes. So let's figure out essentially the middle. All right, so what's the difference between 80 over 19 and 48 over 19? Let's figure out that difference, because that's how we're going to set up an absolute value inequality. So 80 over 19 minus 48 over 19. Let's see here. 80 minus 48 is 32 over 19. So the difference between them is 32 over 19. So the halfway point between those is if we took 30 over 19 and divided it by 2. So 30 over 19, or 32 over 19, I'll slide up a little bit. By the way, this is part B. I'll write that here. 32 over 19, right, divided by 2. Well, let's just say divided by 2, we know. I'll write that. We know that's saying 32 over 19 times a half, right, dividing by 2. And you end up with 16 over 19. Okay, so 16 over 19 is the basically the distance from the middle to one endpoint and the middle to the other endpoint. And we know the middle between those two. What is the exact middle of those two? Well, let's see. We can go, if we know 80 and 48, what's the halfway point between 80 and 48? The halfway point between 80 and 48 would be 64. Yeah. So we can set up an equation now, and we can say that if we take the altitude that we have and we subtract it from 64 over 19. Now, keep in mind, 64 over 19 is the halfway point between 80 over 19 and 48 over 19. And we say that that has to be less than or equal to 16 over 19, which 16 over 19, that is our distance from the middle to each endpoint. Then this would be our absolute value inequality that would represent the altitudes. I hope that makes sense. So what you do is you take the endpoints for your altitudes, recap real quick, endpoints for your altitudes, you find the midpoint, which the midpoint's 64 over 19, and you say, okay, for whatever altitude I get, if I subtract out the midpoint, I need that midpoint to be between, right, less than or equal to, between a distance of 16 over 19, because the distance of 16 over 19 reaches those endpoints. Now, if you were to actually solve this, remember you'd say x minus 64 over 19 less than or equal to 16 over 19. You'd add that over and you'd get x less than 80 over 19, which is what we have here. And then we do the negative version of that, and we end up with x greater than 48 over 19. So I hope you understand how that works. Hopefully that makes some sense.